Okay, so this panel is pretty much, I'll call an unraveling session, because this subject is still very new to many of us, and I would say even scary. The first panel alluded to that when he had to say, AI is not coming to take our jobs. Like, that's in the consciousness of a lot of people, and I wonder why. So I would start with you, Obinna. You've had a significant role in shaping stories and narrative for major brands. Can you share how you think AI has influenced or will influence your approach to creating now?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Interesting question, and it's interesting that the whole concept of artificial intelligence before now was something we only saw, in the four corners of the screen. Years ago, you can imagine if you had watched Terminator 2 and you've seen Skynet and a lot of how the end of the world would happen and stuff like that. It's stuff we've only seen in movies, right?
Yeah.
But now we're grappling with artificial intelligence on our devices. Even as even as little as Grammarly is AI. Lots of all the little functions that happen. It's interesting because the conversations are happening around how, will AI take away my job? What's really going on? There's a lot of confusion. For instance, if you look at what's happening in Hollywood with the Screen Actors Guild and all the writers, think right now we're in a situation where something is written, you don't know whether it's human where a human being is reading it or whether it's a robot somewhere or exactly. So I think for me, I have a completely different perspective, and I think it's really around how you see it. And I think that like when I have these conversations with creators, I tell them it's how you embrace the technology. You have to figure out a way to use it to suit what it is that you want to do. Especially, I'm speaking for me purely because I'm a creative.
Yeah.
And when I started to put my hands to use, and I was like, wow, I give a quick example. Now, you might ask yourself, how does artificial intelligence or AI help a filmmaker? I give you an example, a very simple example. Okay, let me start with one. So Nia Kimilaya just released a film called The House of Secrets, right? For those people who are pretty much into, I assume everybody here watches Nollywood in one shape or form or consumes what comes out of Nollywood. And he worked with a cinematographer called Barney, and together. So what they did was to sort of look at what Nigeria looked like in the 40s and 50s, and to look at what a train station would look like. They just pretty much put it as a prompt in Midjourney, and it gave them images. Now, what I do now is, if I'm somebody who, by being a producer, a filmmaker, sometimes I create pitch decks, to pitch ideas, right? I can do that easily now. If imagine concept artists, like I come from an artistic background, and I used to work in an agency back in the early 2000s, and it took the best artists to create some of the best concept art. If you needed to, work with a concept artist, they're working with Photoshop to illustrate, or they're doing, if you go back years before that, they're doing airbrush. For those who know about airbrush from the 80s and the 90s, then the Photoshop came, here in the 90s, and so you need someone who has that skill set. But now, with a prompt, I can create a concept I have in my head. Let's say a Boki Ninjas in space. In 8K. And I can do that, and I can have several variations of it in seconds. Now, I can do that, and I can put that in my pitch deck and pitch that because I have an idea for a story, and that, it will take me lots of hours of photo manipulation, but I can do that with just prompts. So that's an example of how you can create your concept, bring your concept to life using AI. There are people who have created full comic strips, comic books, using artificial intelligence. And that's just pretty much scratching the surface, that kind of thing. So I think it's more of embracing the technology and seeing how it can make you more creative, make you more productive, as opposed to being scared about it. Because at the end of the day, it's really about how you embrace the tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It really interesting, starting from the point of accepting it, and Justin is someone who is at the other part of the equation, the people creating. You created Kainene, right? And when it came out, I was one of the first sets of people to use it. I was so excited about how communicative she was. I call her my guy. she's very communicative, and she was really a good team member in terms of creating stories. Now, what inspired or what motivated you to build such an assistant, and how's the reception been, amongst creative?
Yeah, good question. Can anyone hear me? I'm
Yeah.
never quite sure. Yeah. So building Kainene Vosavan was primarily like a personal challenge for myself. For context, I just recently embarked on a master's in computer science. And while just as part of the MSc program, I kind of have to do a lot of reading. And it's a hybrid master's, which means some part of it is offline, some part of it is online, and I'm in the online phase, and I kind of need a study partners. Did not have those. And so I started working on Kainene Vosavan, and I kind of share snippets on social media. It was supposed to be like a personal thing, and then people were like, make it open. We want to try it out. And so I made it public, and then I got like a bunch of people using it. So the primary motivation for creating Kainene Vosavan, I would say, is my interest in the generative AI space. Kind of started sometime in 2019, 2020. At this point, the company known as OpenAI had begun to record breakthroughs in generative AI, right? It was piggybacking off of Google's attention is all you need transformer model. Yeah. And so OpenAI basically productized that, and counter to what most AI companies were doing at the time, they were shipping, right? Really, they were putting those products out there for people to use. Most times, AI tends to stay theoretical. And so OpenAI kept shipping, and so they shipped GPT-2, which was good but not great. It wasn't ready to be put in the hands of consumers, and then they did GPT-3. At the time GPT-3 came out, the very first thing that I built was something called Movie Plotter, right? Which basically I took like a bunch of plot synopsis directly off of Netflix, the Nollywood section, and I fed it into the model, and I wanted the model to, come up with theoretical Nollywood movies. I just wanted to see if it was possible. Yeah. It was outlandish, but it worked. It was great. At the time, OpenAI itself was very skeptical about, putting its models out in the public, so they didn't quite let me launch it, because I actually sent in an application. I was like, I built this with your model. Can I put it out there? And you have to make back then you had to make a video presentation to the team at OpenAI. I did all of that, and then they gave me clearance, but then I got bored and I never shipped that. Yeah, and then GPT-4 came, right? I think GPT-4 was the one that made people suddenly sit up and then realize that, this is excellent. And so that's the journey, right? So I've been working with models. I have built some of my own, it's just not as powerful as OpenAI's. And so when I had the opportunity to fine-tune an LLM, I jumped at it. And so that was how I began to, fine-tune Kainene Vosavan. I basically hosted it on my own back end, made it public, and then people started to use it. So my primary motivation was, a practical interest in working with LLMs. So they're called large language models, and also I was seeking a personal study assistant, and it turned out that that's something other people want as well. Okay. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Interesting. And it's interesting that both of you also have strong creative background. You love comics, you also do digital art. And so as much as you're creators, you're also users of these models. What would you say are the most exciting things about AI integrating into our creative space? I'll start with you, and then you can also answer.
I think that, for content creators and for people who create audiovisual content, I feel that, so there are breakthroughs in things like Adobe Podcast, for instance, where you record in mono, and you can turn it into stereo. So you don't have to buy a huge, expensive Sennheiser E400 that costs X amount. So yeah, exactly. So basically, you can have your content studio in your bag, essentially, because you have the tools that can help you clean up, right? After the fact, so we're really fixing things in post now, right? Yeah. So so I think things like that, just make the difference for content creators, and also, you are trying to break, maybe a producer who's struggling with a track, and he's trying to figure out, I want to understand the DNA of this track. So he takes it into lala.ai, breaks it down. So I have my bass, I have the strings, I have my lead, I have everything for people, because I compose music. So so you have to break all of that down. So it's just simplifications, things like just making things a little bit more easier, you know, that kind of thing. You can clean up audio, you know, that kind of thing, separate channels and stuff like that. So I think for creatives, it's massive. It's really huge, you know. Consider your workflow from 5 years ago and what you can do now. You know, like there's also this podcast plugin that is in Premiere Pro that literally edits your content. If you have a 3-cam setup, you throw it in, it just edits it for you in less than 2-3 minutes, and you have a cut ready to go. So that's where we are right now. So so I think it's like what is important is that creators need to educate themselves about the tools that are available to you, because once you can do that, you can arm yourself with that information and what AI can do for you. It changes your game.
Great. You want to add to that, Justin?
Yeah, no. What Obinna has said is absolutely excellent. I think one of the most exciting experiences that I personally had with AI was when I checked out Descript. I can't remember the URL for just Descript now. It's an actual podcast recording tool, just like he mentioned.
Yeah.
And when you're talking, like I'm talking right now, I have like a bunch of feelers that I'm actually not aware of right now. And you can, usually if you want to take out feelers, you have to like go to the audio blocks and then cut and paste and all of that. And then, Decrypt basically produces a transcript from your conversation, and you can edit that transcript, which reflects in the audio, right? Like, so the first time that I saw this happen, right, it blew my mind, right? It's like, let's assume you mispronounce the word, and then you hear it in the audio, and then you type it correctly, and because it's sampling your voice, it recreates it in correct pronunciation, right? If you delete your ums and ahs, they just remove, like, and everything, like, you can, I forgot to add like a message from my sponsor. Just type it in,
And it uses your voice.
Yeah, you can set your mood so you can be excited, informational.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of things. And at the time, having no like understanding of how neural networks and AI systems work and everything, I was like, how is this possible, right? Because even as a software engineer, there's just a way that you think as an engineer that actually doesn't map to the way you think about AI, right? AI is a complete discipline that is almost divorced from being a software engineer. It's crazy. And so it required me to re-educate myself and reorient myself in actually understanding how AI models work. And I think that creatives can benefit from that kind of thinking, right? It's a complete paradigm shift. It's most times we use the word paradigm shift a little too loosely, right? Yeah, but this is it's honestly a paradigm shift, right? Because the core idea is, up until now, the greatest minds on this planet have belonged to Homo sapiens, right? There's nobody outthinking us. The dolphins come close, but nobody outthinking us, right? Like the thing that makes us the dominant species is intelligence, right? We have such cognitive prowess, right? And we are on the cusp of imbuing literal sand with cognition. That's literally like silicon, right? Computers, right? And if we do this, we have, because the human brain is great, but it's capped. It's organic matter that actually has limitations. And if we generally believe that, if we give raw computing power, more memory, more speed, more processing speed to the world's biggest problems, the machines will solve it better than we could ever hope to solve. And so, if this theory holds at any arbitrary level, right, it's beneficial for the creative to understand that this is something that we have some of the best minds in the world working towards. And even in its incomplete, raw, imperfect form, even right now, it's still imperfect, you can harness that potential right now to 10x yourself, right? And sure, there are some challenges and there are some dangers, implicit dangers, like to AI models, and I hope we can discuss that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, there are benefits that are just right at your fingertips. And you might just be doing yourself a disservice if you don't take advantage of it. So my general advice is, have like a welcoming and experimental and curious mindset towards these things. Play with them. They're not going to hurt you, at least yet. right? So just have fun.
It's interesting that you say, the way the benefits and the dangers are on the same coins, like that's a flip side and you're at the danger zone, right? So we had this conversation briefly, and I really, really like to touch on it because for me, one of my strongest concern is the question of authorship, right? And I think that comes because naturally I'm a writer, and I'm like, okay, when I work with AI, who is the author of the work that I've created? As a programmer, what would your answer be? As a creative, what would your answer be? Let's start with you, Justin.
I really want to hear what Obinna has to say.
Wow. Obinna, you want to start?
This is a very tough one. It's really difficult to say because, I would say the language model is still being developed. It's something that is not quite there yet. But here, this is how I would answer this question. You are the so, okay, I'm on to interact with guys here.
Yes.
Who has tried using, of course, everybody has used ChatGPT, correct? Have we used Midjourney, generative AI?
Yeah, I have.
Correct, yeah. DAL-E, etc. Now, you're putting something called a prompt, correct?
Yeah.
Correct? Now, you are the author of that prompt. And no two people can have the same prompt, I feel, except somebody has access to your, because like I use something called Wombo. I pay for an app called Wombo.
I need your prompts. His prompts are so detailed.
So I use something called prompt, and I can see my prompt history. I even hear that people sell prompts.
I was going to mention the prompt
exactly.
marketplace.
Yeah. It's a marketplace for prompts. So I feel that the originality in you being able to access AI, that ability for you to come up with something that is original in terms of your prompt, that's a level of originality because you need to, like for instance, Midjourney. If you used Midjourney before, if you start on the at the rudimentary level, obviously when you start to impute you can keep getting deeper, and that depth comes with adding more details. So it's something that you need to. It's a skill, something you have to harness over time. So I feel that for me, originality from that perspective is something that comes or something that you have because you have put in those prompts. Now, how it generates it is a completely different conversation. But I feel that as long as you're able to come up with your specific sort of type of prompt, set you apart. There's this guy, I've forgotten his name, Malik Afegbai. For those people, yeah. So he created this fashion runway for elders. It went viral. Yeah. So if you look at he uses Midjourney. So if you look at he's created a look. So when you see his work, you can tell because of how the uniqueness of his prompts. That kind. So you can, maybe there's something about your prompts. Maybe if you understand film techniques, because what happens is that because it can replicate what you're putting, I wanted to have anamorphic lens flares. I wanted to have a certain hue. So you can actually modify those things, so they become unique to you. So that's I'm answering that question.
Great.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent take on it. That's why I wanted to hear his take.
All right. So Justin.
So let me like take this from the actual attribution point of view, right? It's like I put in a prompt, I get something, right? Content. And that content, by merely existing because my prompt invoked it, now becomes mine, right? I'm not going to attribute it to the AI. I'm not going to say co-authored with the AI, right? I'm just going to say this is my stuff. And then I rewrite it so it's a little bit different or unique. And then I take full ownership, right? Same. I could choose to say, for example, that I generated this prompt with Midjourney, and the only reason I'm doing that is because there's a Midjourney look.
Yeah.
But imagine a hypothetical future where an AI image is indistinguishable from one taken by a human photographer. Then I can just be like, I took it with my own camera.
It's like a disclaimer.
There's literally nothing that's going to happen to you, right? Nobody's going to sue you. You're not going to get any DMCA takedowns. You're good, right? And so the question then becomes, are we whitewashing and erasing some actual ancestor creators, right, along the line, right?
Yeah.
Because these models did not, create the capabilities of creating this content out of thin air. They had to be trained on something, right? And somehow, if we pack all of humans' collective knowledge to this particular checkpoint and then force it, somebody call it the meat grinder, right? Force it through the meat grinder of an LLM, and then at the other end, we create content that we cannot attribute, and therefore we can be sued for. Are we doing a disservice to the people who came before us, right? And what does that even bode for us, right? Cool, the thing I'm creating today, eventually, like, could I lose ownership of it by way of an LLM, right? And I talked to you about this yesterday, so I'm going to get a little bit technical, but hopefully not too much. I'm just going to try to talk about like the innards of an LLM and a concept called bit rinsing in programming. So the idea of bit rinsing, and think of bits as like ones and zeros that go into computers, right? So in general, when you have, for example, let's assume I take a picture, and then I post that picture on the internet, and I say, attribution, get the images, I posted this is me, right? I'm the author of this image. In reality, that image on the internet is a bunch of ones and zeros. Yeah. It is replicable. In fact, if you save it, you've copied all of those ones and zeros, and now it's on my computer, right? And so, in the context of software, there's no real ownership. You can't own bits. You can't own ones and zeros. Ownership is a legal construct. It's a separate thing from programming. Like, those are two things that actually cannot be interacted with. Legal code does not interact with software code, right? And it has been like a lifelong endeavor of people in the legal strain and people in the technical strain to figure out a way to connect these two things, right? It's not really successful. But then there comes the problem of bit rinsing. So, I was talking to Julie about this yesterday. So there's a website called This Person Does Not Exist, right? Which generates computer-generated humans, right? They don't exist because the model was trained on human faces and now is making faces of its own. But theoretically, if in an infinite number of sequences, I could generate a face that looks exactly like Obinna's, right? It's not Obinna's face, but just by randomness, I've generated 1 billion faces. I just landed on, is a very 1 in a billion outcomes, but this face is exactly his. But I can prove mathematically that it's not him, right? And then let's assume some of them buys the rights to those images, and then I blow up and I do a bunch of ads. Maybe tobacco ads, right? And I say, Obinna endorses tobacco. Get your kids on tobacco at age 2, right? And then he sues, right? It's like, you're using my likeness, and then I can prove, like, mathematically, this is not your face. It just happens to look like you, right? What I have done in that case is bit rinsing. I've taken bits that used to exist in a form that I could attribute to Obinna, pass it through an LLM, and now he has no right to it. That is a challenge. Like, it's an actual challenge, right? And it's a challenge that people have to, like, always think about. They say innovation outpaces, legislation, right? Which means that we don't have the laws that even begin to comprehend or apprehend any of these problems. And to be fair, the world is working on it, and I think that we arrive at something that basically protects creatives. Everyone, But in the meantime, I would say that, yes, LLM models have been trained on the collective output of all of humanity as long as it's open, right? It's trained on open content. And many people have started to take down their content from the internet because they don't want LLMs to train, but I think that ship already sailed a long time ago. It's a bit, reactive. But yes, if you create something from an LLM, in reality it's yours. Honestly speaking, like, nobody's gonna, like, yank it from you. It's your stuff. But it helps to know, like, this is how it works internally, right? This model is not, it's learning patterns from the world's greatest minds and then extending those patterns into the future. Technically, it is not ripping off anybody, right? It's even the way of the creative. This is the way. You go to school and you read the works of the greatest minds, and that inspires you to make your own stuff, right? But definitely someone inspired it. And that's actually how LLMs work, right? So an LLM is taking content from people and then creating content that looks like or is inspired by, and you as the prompter, you're like the supervisor saying, I want something that mirrors this wall. And then the model says, okay, you know what? I'm going to check in my repository what closely mirrors this, and then I'm going to create you original content. For all intents and purposes, it's original.
Yeah.
The AI model itself cannot be attributed to because it's not really creating anything, which means that you, the prompter, you have full creative ownership. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I feel better now. You took me there, and I was like, oh, okay, brought me home. But let's bring it closer again. Let's bring it closer home. As writers, I find that this is the best time to be a writer, right? If you're not thinking that way, you probably should, listen to sessions like this more and understand why you should. But, break it down to writers who are very skeptical and what would be the benefits, right? And in exploring that benefit, how can we create a balance so we don't become over-reliant on the technology?
Is that for me?
Yes, for you.
Okay. So there are actually two aspects to writing. I guess as a writer, you're going to collapse those two aspects, but usually there are actually two parts to writing. One part is actually the creative expression of your idea. And then there's a mechanical construction and, just basically putting them in a coherent form. Like, so one part is very nebulous, and that's like really the great part. That's the part that makes, you read something and like say, this is like this author, because it's like a mapping of their own mind. It has their cognitive imprint on it, right? That part, I would say, you should never outsource, and you should never let die, even if you have like all the AI tools in the world. So AI models do not think, right? They do a good job of pretending to think, right? They can fool a lot of people into thinking that they think, because you can actually have an argument with an AI model, and it's like, oh, I see your point. I had not considered it from this point of view. And then you think, I'm having like an argument, but I promise you, no thought is happening. Absolutely none. You just have like a really, really powerful form of autocomplete that has the power to pretend like it's thinking, right? The day computers think, we'll be in a different world, I promise you.
Yeah.
But right now, they're not thinking, but they're very good at mimicking thinking, and that's because if you ever want to read the Attention is All You Need paper, it actually explains how it's pretty great, right? So back to the original question. So as a writer, you really do not want like your creative prowess to deteriorate. You don't want it to atrophy. You just want it to be great, which means that the things that set you apart will remain the things that set you apart. One of them is that, one, you exist in the real world. I cannot tell you how much of an advantage over AI models this is. But merely existing in the real world means you are taking input that an AI model never will, right? You're in this hall right now, and you're looking at the person next to you, and you're making assessments. You are people watching. Your mind is racing in different directions, and these things become fodder for your next story, for your next creative exploration. These mediums do not exist for AI models, right? They cannot exist in the real world. They cannot take in input. And because of that, they have almost an incomplete and a false model of the world, right? They can only learn from what somebody else has already created. Because of that, you are unique. You have a unique perspective, and you have like unique tools for creating, right? So that is the part that you must never let die. You must always nurture it, right? But when it comes to technique, right? The world has Earth has spun 1 million cycles and we have enough of a repository to know some things that work, such that you shouldn't be experimenting to figure out the best way to structure a story, because you have people who have done that over and over again. We have arrived some patterns that make sense. You should definitely leverage on those patterns, right? So you combine the efficiency of a model that has learned all of the best practices of the world with your own creative, unique insight. Then you have a true cyborg, right? The human brain and the machine. Really great insights, right? Really great outcome. That's how you should think of your interactions with LLMs, right? You are the brains, it's the brawn, right? And if you can segment those two things, then you're never going to lose. You're going to win.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Obinna, let's talk in the context of Nollywood right, or Nigerian film industry, and how this, in a way, is impacting how we create stories. And like Justin said, AIs have to be trained. They're trained across with a lot of information that is present. Now, we know for the longest time that we've had story problems larger than the ones that are great. So if the AI is learning from what currently exists, there is also the possibility of the challenge that it would reproduce in that same pattern. So what would you say is the best way to approach integrating with the mind to be better, to increase our efficiency, to increase our output?
So my response to that would be, like we've established, the LLM keeps learning from what already exists. So that presupposes that for us to create variety, we need to write more. We need to delve deeper. We need to tell more. So at the end of the day, the onus is still on the writers, the creators in Nollywood to look beyond their sphere, push their story boundaries, look for completely different narratives that are about us, and create more stories. Because it's kind of like it's like this theory of abundance. If you have more, there's a lot more to go around. There's a lot more to learn from. So I think the work still needs to be done because AI is not a way out. That's the truth. So if you think that AI is a way out, then you're completely wrong. Because if we do not continue to figure out how to write new stories, and of course new stories from our shared experiences, from essentially our experiences as Africa, our deeper levels of consciousness as Africans, as Nigerians, tapping from our various unique perspectives in Africa, then nothing is going to happen. So the onus is on us to keep writing, keep pushing, keep looking for newer stories. From the other panel, we're talking about tapping into our culture now, and now really pushing our culture to see what we can talk about, that kind of thing. And it's diverse, it's rich. So let's tap into that. Let's tell more stories. I think that's the way it works. That way, once we now decide to draw from the brawn of the models, then something then it's complementary. Then we have that that duality of excellence, as it were. But then again, the onus is that we need to write more, we need to delve more, explore more.
Okay, great. Let's dream now, right? Let's think about the future of AI in our creative space. How do you see it benefiting us in the long term? Justin, I keep saying Obinna, Justin. Justin, I'll start with you.
So the first thing that AI models do, right, is that they kind of level the playing field for most people, and I'm going to explain why. For the most part, we have information asymmetry. So if you think about like access to knowledge, right, before you think about like the Alexander Library, right, which used to be like the biggest library in the world at the time, right, the subtle implication of that was that for the most part, we had knowledge concentrated in physical locations, which meant that like the farther away from those central locations you get, the more ignorant people get, right? And if we take the axiom that knowledge is power, if we take it to be literally true, then we have like disenfranchised people on the outskirts, right? And then we've come a long way, with Google's blue text, hyperlink technology to make knowledge, accessible to the common man via Google search, right? And we've seen what the outcome that like, first of all, it has made the average person seem more knowledgeable, and it's had made more people pretend to be geniuses on social media, right? And that is objectively a good thing, right? It means that there's a certain tyranny that gated access to knowledge engenders, right? And when people have access to knowledge, then the only limitation is like what you then do with the knowledge. But first things first, you need to remove the barrier of knowledge, right? And then we have search, Google search, and then I can say how can I do X, and then I go on Google search, right? So you can think of that as a liberation, democratization of knowledge, right? And then now we have AI models. Now the reason why AI models are an improvement on that paradigm is that where knowledge had to be created on, knowledge has always needed to be created on a bespoke level. That's what I wanted to say, on a bespoke level, which is that when I need to know how to do something, on the long tail, it tends to become tailored to my own personal requests. But the internet is not designed to cater to one person. It tends to cater to a more generic kind of request. The question that everybody's asking, you know. But AI models answer your specific question, right? And that distinction is very, like, it's the non-trivial distinction, right? Is that if I want to know how to bake a cake, there's probably a Google answer right now, right? But if I wanted to know how to bake a cake incorporating melon seeds, and I don't know why anybody would want to do that, but let's assume that you wanted to do that, you probably will not find an answer, right? But the LLM could probably tell you how to do that, right? And the power of this is that it means that any single human now has access to information very cheaply that pertains to their own unique wants. We have effectively, you know, taken the cost of knowing how to do any specific thing down to zero. So we've democratized knowledge and everybody has equal access, right? This is important, especially for the African, right? Because usually bespoke knowledge tends to come at the cost of R&D, right? Research. And that's expensive, right? And now technically you don't need to have that kind of budget. If the models get smarter, it's going to be even more and more
accessible,
you know, incredible, the kind of things that we can do. So the concept of leapfrogging is that when you are a developing country running a race with a developed country, it seems so wide, you know, right? And then because the developed country becomes encumbered by a lot of legacy systems. So you've seen it in the banking system, for example. If you go to Europe and then you use the banking system in Europe, like I try to make a payment, and then it's like you come in and next week you will see some ACH. That is ridiculous, right? It's like, and then I'm like, but in Nigeria, it's just, I get in a second, right? I do a transfer and I get immediate. No, you have to go to the bank then. And that's because we did not have all the reams of paper, all the things that all those old banks from 200 years ago had to. They need to keep those structures because people's pensions are like, so they, so they can't just migrate their infra. But we did not have any of that problem. And so when we were able to do NIBs and all of that, like we had like some of the best banking infrastructure in recent times. So because of that, I'm saying that this is an opportunity for the average African to leapfrog and catch up to the knowledge base of what they would call your Western contemporaries, right? That's one. Secondly is that an AI model is an agnostic, you can think of it as a bowl, and the knowledge that you put inside it is what basically gives it this personality, and basically it's a function of what it does. Which means, for example, there's a bunch of people currently teaching LLMs to speak, you know, Igbo language, and you know, and so you can have like models that are like really tailored to the Nigerian context, just so perfectly tailored, and because we like it's a one and done thing. Once you've created the model, once the model is learned, once you put it in the hands of the people, and then you do reinforced learning through human feedback, you improve the model, right? And you have stronger representations and stronger outcomes for the average Nigerian creative. So the future that I see, that I envisage for LLM and AI and people's interaction with AI models is that, first of all, we remove the barrier to individual excellence. And secondly, we make models that are bespoke to the African condition. And thirdly, just by the feedback loop, the quality of everything that we output from that point becomes better. Like we just raise the quality baseline. And that's what I imagine is going to happen.
Great. The most interesting part of, you know, everything you said is so spot on, but that democratization of knowledge, I find it so important in this day and age because that's the only way that we can change any narrative. You cannot change what you don't know. And, you know, our earlier panel said, you know, for you to tell your own story, you need to really know who you are. So, again, to avoid, I would like you to answer the same question, but also to avoid us entering or digging a hole where we go the same circle of being told who we are via an AI that has been trained by, you know, just how much opportunity, you know, exists for us to get involved now. Because this is you have to be a part of it. You have to be part of the trainer's conversation. So how do you see us getting involved in that future to fully maximize this potential that he's just highlighted?
So I think he's an advocate of somebody who's already building.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
Kindness speaks pidgin at some point, like
Exactly.
so
So that's a classic example, because the technology is like a sponge, and there is no. And when you say something is democratized, there is no authoritarian hold over it anymore. So I think we need to have more people developing for here in Africa.
Exactly.
So you develop that, and it's with the focus on actually, an acclimatization of what is inherently African, what is ours, and that's how you build ownership. Because it's not going to happen overnight. So, interestingly, it's not like a car brand or anything. This is something that is amoeboic. It's whatever it is you give it that it's going to take. So I think we need more people who are invested in building in that space, because that's what we need, so that we have more, that's focused on, solving peculiar African problems. And that's why I like, one of the instances that you gave, because I think that I see a future where we're able to solve, native problems, local problems. Because at the end of the day, so if you look across, our industries, around governance, politics, the environment, it's not beyond creating content. There are problems that can be solved, and just by appropriating this technology, we're able to solve those problems. And I think, coming back to the creative, for me, I have a passion for creatives and creativity, because I just feel that so many people have so much they want to do, so much they want to express. Now, with artificial intelligence, it gives them that you're empowered to do those things. And like you said, you remove the cost, the barrier to entry. There's so many things that have been sort of cut out of your way because you have access to it right now. So for me, imagining an empowered creative being able to do. Because I was on Twitter yesterday, and there was this guy who created a sci-fi film using Midjourney, Runway, and something else. He created a trailer, and for me, I always say to myself, the moment where we're able to move from generative art and we're able to do text to video, because that's starting to happen. That's starting to happen now, and that's a completely different. That's a serious game changer, because people can now sit down and they're able to do animated motion picture with AI. Literally. And so imagine what that can do for people who have been struggling in the animation industry, trying to just, do regular old cell animation and stuff like that, and looking for. But now it's so this is happening in 2023. So imagine what will happen in the next couple of. I'm not talking about years, months, because and what I like about it is every day it is changing, it is learning, the evolution is light speed. So I see a future of really, really. Accomplished creatives, accomplished people, who are armed, and nothing is essentially stopping them, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's my take.
I'll open the floor, because I know that a lot of people have questions. If you do have questions, you can just raise your hand while I go to my last conversation here. I want to talk about the usage, right? And for someone who is probably agnostic about the entire idea or totally uninterested, but now you're beginning to change their minds. What do you advise in terms of approaching the use of AI? As a writer, most of us in this room right now are writers. A friend of mine sometime last week was trying for the first time, like, Julie, I want to use ChatGPT to write a script, but he's just writing a script like Nollywood script. I don't understand. And Nollywood, in terms of like mediocre, that's the context, but that's and I wanted to know the process that he approached the writing with AI. It was chaotic. So what would you advise?
That's a good question. And more to your friend's example, generative AI models are also generalizing. And the problem with generalizing is that it tends to tend towards the average. And so the outcome tends to be middling at best, right? And I think that's what your friend experienced. And this is why Obinna is talking about prompts. Your prompts basically recalibrate the model and basically teach the model about your expectations. And it's not the kind of thing you get right once, right? There's a whole science to prompting, right? And in this hypothetical, I'm assuming you're agnostic, so you don't particularly care hard enough to want to learn how to prompt, right? But imagine an outcome. So one of the very first things that if you ever use OpenAI in the beginning, it'll be like, imagine you're telling a small child to do something, right? And I actually like that framing because I always keep it at the back of my head. It's this really, really smart kid, right? But he's still a kid. And so you need to be almost ultra specific and always willing to gently nudge over and over and over again until eventually you nail it, right? And so when you start interacting with generative models, so two kinds of things happen, right? Some people have no expectations. They just come in and then their minds are blown. Like, wow, this is great. And then someone like, this has just been hyped up and it could never live to my expectations. And it's like, come on, I could have written a better script, right? So there are two things. So one of them is prompting, and there are two kinds of prompts, right? There's a system level prompt and there's like a user prompt, right? And most people don't know the distinction between the two, but I recently heard that ChatGPT released an update that makes it clear the distinction. A system level prompt is basically like you're role playing with the model, and you are telling the model at the point of, before you start having this conversation, what role to assume. So here's an example of a system level prompt. You are a big time TV executive, right? You've looked through 1,000 scripts over the length of your career, and you have a knack for what makes a good script. I want you to come up with this year's blockbuster, right, in this genre, right, with these parameters for this audience, an estimated budget of X, estimated, opening weekend, whatever, right? And then that's the system prompt. You've set it up, right? You forget about that. Now you come in as a user. You're like, okay, how about a love movie, right? Targeted at singles between the ages of 18 to 45. And the idea is that I'm going to release it during Valentine, right? And now you're in dialogue with the model. The model remembers that it's a big-time TV exec, which means its framing is about maximizing profits, which means it's thinking about making the movie that will appeal to this audience, and it's pulling just intuitively, it's pulling some of the biggest love movies ever made, right? And so the model will begin to tend towards that kind of end. And you might find a gold mine there. Might not be the whole script that's great, but maybe the kernel of the idea basically like launches you in the right direction. Or you might change your mind. Okay, you know what? Let's go indie instead, right? I'm no longer interested in a big blockbuster. Let's redefine this genre, right? And so you can change the system prompt. You only have $2,000, right? So location is a constraint. I want a movie that start to end happens in one scene. And you can do any of these things, right? So if you notice, the thing that matters in the prompting is your own experience. If you don't know anything about making a movie or writing a script, you could never prompt that model properly, right? And so before AI models became AI models, something called an expert system is the predecessor to artificial intelligence. And an expert system was a bunch of if statements, right? It's like, if this, then do this, otherwise do this and do that. And so you would take a doctor, right, and ask a doctor, how do you come up with a medical diagnosis? And doctor's like, oh yeah, if this patient comes and this patient is presenting with a cough, then I'm going to ask this question. And then if they say yes, and I'm going to ask this question, and they'll come up with a diagnosis, right? And then you give it to an engineer then writes this massive program, right, that has a front end. And then it's like, do you have a cough? Yes. Then I'm going to ask this question, blah, blah, blah. And then it's going to say, you have syphilis, as an example, right? And then people are going to be like, Jesus Christ, that's AI, right? Like, you say, oh my God, he asked me this question and he got what my disease is. But at the back end, it's just reflecting the knowledge, the vast knowledge accumulated by one professional, this doctor, representing it in code, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that the reason why the expert systems work was because you were just basically, extracting knowledge from the engineer, from the professional and making it into a software. In the same way, right now, you are the measure of all things when you're prompting AI today. The better you are at understanding what you want, the context of what you're doing, the better you are at getting really good AI outcomes. Now, so an AI response is a reflection of your own competence. unfortunately, right? And so the better you are at your field, the more like I use it like for software. Like I use it as like my debugging partner. And sometimes I realize that the shoddiness of the response was an outcome of the shoddiness of my question. Like it's like I too did not understand what I was asking, you know? And so it did not understand. I just like, maybe this is your answer, right? Yeah. And the more precise I get, like, no, like I'm asking about this specific, apologies for the confusion. Here is the answer. I'm like, nice one, right? And so I've actually forgotten the question.
I mean, like you've answered.
Yeah,
you know.
but yeah.
Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, let me just add to what he said. You know, at the end of the day, I think the lesson here is, you know, guys, it's there's no shortcuts to honing your craft. You know, if you're a writer, read more, write more.
Yeah.
You know, AI is not going to suddenly make you a pro level. Or suddenly make people Netflix collect your script or stuff like that. Yeah. You know, you have to really spend time doing the work. You know, if you're a graphic designer, whatever it is that, you know, like for instance, I mean, for those who use Photoshop, there's now generative fill. You know, you can expand your image, etc. But then again, you must understand how to use the program, that kind of thing. I was at Cannes. I was at the Cannes Film Festival last year, and I was in a session, interesting session, and they were demoing this is really crazy. They were demoing something called Lago.ai. And what was it about? They had producers from across the globe, right? And they would invite just like this, you know, seated in the audience. They would invite the producer to come and pitch a film. So basically, they would step up, you know, like they had about 25, 30 of them. So they would step up, they pitch the film. You know, so you have your actors, your whoever it is, your A-list actors. You have the logline, you have your synopsis, and all of that. And they feed it into a program called Lago. Lago tells them immediately how successful that project will be. And instantly you get the results. Don't invest in this film. So there are investors there, so don't invest in this film. You're not going to get zero, you know, this film won't do well. It probably will score 25% Rotten Tomatoes. It cannot sell. Wow. So basically you had this German engineers who have built the thing, and instantly you see it. So depending on your pitch, you know, AI immediately computes all of that based on all the variables and based on all the information that you fed it, and tells you whether so that becomes a tool for investors. Okay, yeah. So if Lago tells me that I will get 500% return in investment, I'll invest in your film. Mm-hmm. So instantly, this is the future we're talking about. But then again, like I said, the onus lies on us to think about better stories, because at the end of the day, what you give is what you get. Once you fit the AI is what you get. So at the end of the day, it's, we human beings are still the one we still have to do all the work. It's still on us. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's essentially a tool. It's an enabler, But then again, you have the superpower, and it lies on you to make it work. So yeah.
Great. I mean, that also kind of sums up the questions. Like, it's a creative assistant. Any questions? Just one. Okay, we'll take two.
The question of ownership of content made with AI. And I think that is really, really a big problem, not here alone, but right around the world. So you brilliantly submitted that, of course, since there's human effort being contributed to, let's say, OpenAI, ChatGPT now, there's a tendency that you're likely the owner. And you submitted, of course, that it is a legal issue, which I really agree with you. It's a legal problem. Presently, I understand that there are federal lawsuits, federal actions against OpenAI here and there. There's a U.S. judgment that said a particular woman an author lost copyright on some part of a work that was generated through OpenAI. It is not yet a big deal here in Nigeria because we are still crawling. Even with legislation, our laws are not that strong, and it's a big deal. But I know that a time will come that we are going to have this conversation. The world presently do not know where to stand. There are positions that contents from OpenAI should not be owned personally, and there are also other adverse opinion on that. But I just want to ask that, let's say that we have that, it comes to Nigeria. What position for lawmakers now, what do you think should be the attitude of the lawmakers. Of course, it's a matter of law. It is what the law says, who the owner is, that we earn it. So what advice would you say in the process of give to lawmakers about ownership of content generated from OpenAI, considering the adverse effects, of course?
Thanks for your question. So I would like to start by saying that it is actually very, very complex problem. The reason it's complex is the problem, while it will be resolved obviously in the legal domain, actually has no bearing with the legal domain. Because when you take a model and you train it on human learnings and everything, so let's assume that there's a website, Nairaland, right? Everybody's on Nairaland having conversations. It becomes like the second brain of the Nigerian people. If I want to know if a company listing is a scam, I'm going to ask on Nairaland. A bunch of people are going to respond, and that gives us we all become, totally inoculated against that company, right? That's the job to be done from Nairaland, right? And over the years, Nairaland has had accumulated hundreds of millions of text snippets that are, as far as text is concerned, an approximation of human knowledge to the extent that can be found on the internet. And then you have a model, and then I just basically take all of that, I refine it, and then I pass it through the model, and then you have this Nairaland GPT, right? When I ask it any questions, based on what it has learned, it gives me an answer, right? On the other end of that answer, it looks like it has stolen content from someone, because obviously it learned from someone. But in reality, you can't attribute the answer to one person. Do you understand? And that is actually the crux of the issue. It's like when the answer comes out on the other end, it's not, this is definitely something Justin said. It's not, okay, this was taken from page 2 of this website in 2006. You really can't attribute that way. It's gone. That's what I was trying to explain with the bit reason thing. It's gone. You really cannot reverse engineer back to the original source. It's gone. Which means that if you wanted it to even legislate, you say for somebody to be, for a grievance to have happened, there has to be an aggrieved, right? And the question is, who is the aggrieved? It's like, generally, it's learning from human consciousness, but specifically whose consciousness, right? And so it's actually that's why I said, even though it's going to be resolved in the legal domain, it's really not a legal problem. It's actually really more a technical problem. And if you think about how models are, so you have regression models, you have classification models, right? And you take all of this data, and then the model at the end is making some guesses as to what the answer is. The model doesn't know the answer, right? It's making some guesses as to what the answer is based on what some researcher told it is the answer. So an example is, let's assume that I'm making a model, and the model is going to tell me if this is a chair or a table, right? I'm going to pass it a bunch of images, right? And I'm going to say, this is a chair, this is a table, this is a chair, this is a table, this is a chair, this is a table. I send 100,000 of those examples to the model, and then the model arrives. We don't know how. That's the funny part. We just know that after a while, the model then arrives at a unifying example and unifying answer of what a chair and a table is, right? It never says definitively, by the way, this is a chair and this is a table. It says this is 99% likely to be a chair, right? And this is 1% likely to be a table, right? But through some technical shortcut, we just say it said it's a chair. It really doesn't. Models are never 100% assertive, right? And so when it comes in and then finally I pass it a chair and then it knows that it's a chair, the question is, whose knowledge did it use to know this was a chair? In reality, the model now knows by itself what a chair is, even though it learned from all the knowledge of people who knew what chairs were. Does that make sense? So even though the model learned from all of this input, its subsequent input has nothing to do with what it has learned. It's in the same way, you read a bunch of books, right? You read a bunch of books, and that's how you learn sentence construction. You learn syntax, you learn the semantic relationship between words, and then you start to write, original sentences that closely sound similar to the things you've read, right? A friend of mine, for example, used to read my stories, and he was like, "Oh, you sound so much like Terry Pratchett," and that's because I read a lot of Terry Pratchett when I was growing up. But no one sentence in what I've written is a Terry Pratchett sentence. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Terry can sue me. Sir Terry is dead, but like he couldn't sue me because I'm not ripping him off. But I have learned enough from Sir Terry that the content I'm generating is his, sort of like it's inspired by him. Yeah. And that's close to what an AI model is, which is why it's kind of hard to say what an aggrieved is. So in reality, there's only one bastion that I think is reasonable, is that people who don't want their content to go into the training of AI models should be able to say, exclude my content from the training of your model, right? But after it's trained, you really can't then say, this is my content, and that is the hard part. Yeah. You really can't do that, and that's why it's just going to be like really messy, and I did not study law, so maybe there's a way to do this, but I really don't think it's possible, so.
Okay, yeah. So one more question and we're done, I think. Okay, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. This session has been really, really insightful. Right now, I think I know how to deploy the use of AI better. So, my question is to Mr. Obinna. When he started, he said that objectively, AIs are not coming for our jobs yet, right? They are here to help us improve the things that we do. So I have a question. This design, for example, this stand banner, you give it to a designer, right? And you paid him something to do it, right? So let's say, for example, I come across this AI model that can do this for me, right? And I put in all the prompts, beautiful. In fact, it's even more beautiful than this. And then I get it, and then I just go to print it for free. Have I not taken the designer's job?
Well, let me explain. Let me answer that question like this. So first of all, for you to put in design prompts, you need to think like a designer. If you're not a designer, you're not a designer. And there will always be a difference when a designer actually puts in prompts into an LLM. The difference will always be clear. You can try this. You can give it to you can. I don't know. You can get a friend of yours who's not creative and tell him to type something and put in a prompt. You see that when you put it, because I assume that you're a creative person, there'll be an explicit difference. That's the difference. That's the point. You cannot give what you don't have. You understand what I'm saying? So that's that. So what the difference is that somebody who is not necessarily creative can actually learn. It's actually about practice at the end of the day if they're really, really interested in it. But there will always be that marked difference, and that's why when you see, we have a lot of people who use Midjourney. But then again, people who have spent time, people who are a bit more creative, there's a difference in the output. That's why, look, there are thousands of people that use Midjourney, but there's some people, when you see their own outputs, what's the thing we use again? What's that? The platform where everybody uses Midjourney on, what's it called? Discord, yeah. So if you in Discord, you pretty much can see everybody's prompt. Really, you can see it depending on what community you belong to. The point is that some people's output look a lot why because there's something, like you said, in the engineering of your prompt or in how you craft your prompting. There's a marked difference, and that's what we're talking about. Now, can anybody learn and master it? They can, but it comes with time. There's a process to it. You understand what I'm saying? I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It just solidifies that the fact that very soon, it will take our job.
Thank you so much.
Can I give you one assurance? It's not going to be assurance that you like, but it's assurance regardless. So Isaac Asimov, who is actually the father of robotics, right? He once said something, and he said, any task, any human, like any task that humans are doing right now that can be done by a machine should be done by a machine, right? And that reassures me a lot, right? So if you think about like the span of human history, there are things that used to be done by humans that actually upset a lot of people when it was taken by machines. For example, the loom. If you remember the story of the loom, right? Before, people used to thread clothes, and clothes were very expensive. Most people wore sackcloth because it was expensive, and then the loom came, and then you could make clothes cheaper, but that meant that people who had that skill became obsolete, and there was like a whole riot, people died and everything. Not to downplay that outcome, but it's like, Asimov has always said, anything that can be done by a machine should be done by a machine. And the reason why he says this is that he believes that we are destined for greater things. Yeah, we have higher purpose. We are always bogged down by really, trivial things because of the state of reality. So, to your example, right? We humans have increased the quality benchmark for many things over time, and that's because we had technological breakthroughs and everything, such that this design right now, as it stands today, is a culmination of multiple technological breakthroughs, right? And now we're on the cusp of another one, right? And if it so happens, for example, there are many designs today that can just be offloaded to Canva. And the reason why is that we've templatized a bunch of things so that we don't need to think too much about it. Social media banner should have these dimensions, should reflect this and everything. That's good. Everybody should go with it, right? So that the graphic designer can spend more time innovating and making breakthroughs. So if it so happens that you have an AI model that has figured out all of human graphic abilities to now, let it, right? That's why I said you're not going to like it, but let it, The truth is that anything that has been productized becomes generic. And when it becomes generic, humanity, by virtue of our curiosity and our desire for new things, craves a higher hit, right? And when humans need the higher hit, it can only come from another human, right? It's really a strain on your own intelligence to innovate and make a better design, but that's the only way we can ever progress, right? If AI is going to make, this is how I think, because I'm an engineer and also had those anxieties, I want to write a function and I just type the function name and then it's what am I doing here, man? I'm done. I used to tell my friends, I used to give that Thanos meme where it's the job is done until it will always be, right? It's my work here is done. I should just retire, right? Yeah. It's taking my job. But what happens is that sometimes I get a request that is so left field. Somebody wants to do something that literally there is no playbook for it. The AI fails so spectacularly, right? And I'm but we're back, baby. Right? We're back. And so I know now that maybe in the future I will be replaced, but not today. And it's not anytime soon. Anytime there is something that is oh, Jesus Christ, he pulled it off, I look and I see that there's just so many examples of the thing in the wild that the model has learned, and we probably should retire it. Why are we reinventing the wheel? Let's go on to higher things, right? So always remember, anything that can be done by a robot should probably be done by a robot, so that you can go do things humans should be doing, which is really good stuff.
That is a great way.
Just to round this up.
Yes, please.
Just to say this, whatever it is that human technological advancement is showing us, we're all brought about by human beings. And like he said, robotics, artificial intelligence has taken away monotony, all of drudgery. Now, the next question is, what is next for humanity? AI cannot answer that question. The people sitting in this room can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Obinna. Thank you so much, Justin. This has been such an insightful session. And I know I've learned so much, and so the audience as well. This is the end